And now, without further ado, let's get right to the interview.
Now, the Dallas police wouldn't admit to rigging the lineups, would they?
Of course not.
Well, don't be so sure. Here, let me play this. Did you catch
Yeah,
that?
that was a little garbled on my end, so
Yeah,
maybe,
it was a little garbled, but this is news footage in the hallway of them taking. There's Oswald. There's one of the teenagers right there.
right.
And this is when Oswald's protesting angrily, and he said, "I've been photographed in a t-shirt. Now you guys are taking me in front of a lineup among these men, and that way I will be picked out,
Yeah.
right?" And one of the detectives says, "Yep, that's right." So so we have them on camera admitting to rigging the lineups.
Yeah, that's pretty self-damning for
Yeah.
sure.
They never thought anyone would see this news footage again. They probably didn't even know someone was filming down the hall. So they're like, "Yep, that's right."
That's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, I know. It just keeps getting worse. And this is a good point that was brought up by Larry Ray Harris. I've actually mentioned him a couple of times. He was the world's leading authority on the Tippit murder. He died the year I was born, actually.
Hmm.
But he's the one that inspired me to research the Tippit murder, to dig deep into this. And this is from his 1993 article. It says he makes a very good point here. He says, quote, according to a Secret Service report, Oswald complained of a lineup wherein he had not been granted a request to put on a jacket similar to those worn by some of the other individuals in the lineup, end quote. And then Larry says, why would Oswald want to wear a jacket if he had supposedly discarded the one he was wearing when he shot Tippit? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is, perhaps he saw others in the lineup with jackets and he wanted a similar jacket, not necessarily the Eisenhower type that he was wearing, but
Well, so for those that don't know, the Tippit killer, whoever he was, ditched his jacket. So if Oswald in this lineup is saying, "Hey, where's my jacket?" You would think that if he was guilty and if he was the Tippit murder, he would not request to put the jacket on. Then that would make him, if he was the killer, it would make him more obvious. Like, you know what I mean? Okay, so let's say that there was a murder somewhere and the killer wore like a rainbow jacket and then he ditched his rainbow jacket. And then later that night he's in a lineup and he says, "Hey, where's my rainbow jacket?" You get
right.
it?
Yeah,
That would
exactly.
be that would be a innocent man would not say, "Hey, where's my jacket?" You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense given the fact that the jacket, he was conscious enough, or the assailant was conscious enough to try to ditch a jacket. So obviously wouldn't want to put it back on.
By the way, for those interested, researcher Gil Jesus, he wrote the best article ever written on the lineups in 2009, and you can find it online. It's called, quote, "Were the Oswald lineups valid?" End quote. So I highly implore people to read this article. It's the best thing ever written on the lineups. So, as I said, oh, this is what I said earlier. So Vincent Bugliosi says, show me any other case where 10 eyewitnesses were wrong. Well, it's not 10. It's really 4, as we said. So it should be, show me any other case where 4 witnesses were wrong. Okay, let's do that. So in 2012, 6 eyewitnesses misidentified a murderer. Lionel Grant was exonerated by DNA in 2020. So there you go. There you go. It happened. It can happen. It can happen. Okay. And do you have any more questions before we go?
Yeah, I'm actually where you're at. I don't think it was, my personal opinion is I don't think it was Oswald who was running away from that murder. I think for other reasons. I don't think he physically could have gotten there. But I'm wondering, for me, it still is a lingering thing that you've got, even if you only have four,
Mhm.
you still got a series of people who were testifying that they think it was Oswald. So there is a concern here that even though so many people didn't, you have to weigh. I mean, this is a thing that a jury has to weigh. I mean, eyewitnesses do get it wrong all the time, but you still have people who said that positively it was Oswald. That is an element to overcome if you're going to conclude
Sure.
that it wasn't Oswald.
Oh, no, 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 no. I think I should stay here. My conclusion is not that Oswald didn't shoot Tippit. My conclusion is that the official story has not met its burden of proof.
I see. I see. So you're not suggesting it wasn't Oswald, that they really didn't have a series of witnesses that could properly vouch for
Yeah,
identification. I
yeah.
see. And
I
that's
don't,
different. That's quite different, right? I
not
mean,
con
at the end of the day, we have
not
an issue
convinced.
of a burden of proof that might be met in a courtroom. And the other question is practically, who was it? Who actually walked through that neighborhood and shot J.D. Tippit? That's
Yeah.
really actually the core of the question.
I know a lot of people make conclusions in the Kennedy assassination. That's because, but with the Tippit case, there's no Zapruder film. There's no multiple films of the assassination. There's no cameras. There's no, 175 witnesses. There's no, all that stuff. We don't have all that evidence for the Tippit murder. So therefore, I can only say I'm not convinced that Oswald did the shooting. I don't think the official story, as I said, has met its burden of proof.
Is that influenced also in your own mind by the fact that the timeline just doesn't seem to support that he could go
Yeah.
from North Beckley and get there in time, given the time that it does appear the shooting occurred versus versus the posted official time?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, yes.
That for me is one of the most, I mean, certainly, I know we're talking about a matter of minutes, and I know no one was there with a stopwatch right next to him. So there is always the question of the competing fact sets, but even the Warren Commission, made some level of conciliation for, 1 o'clock was the time he got to the rooming
Yeah,
house. And if that is the case, and that really was the time, then it's almost impossible
I
for him to
know.
have walked there and been there at the moment that the shooting occurred. So to me, I think there's a series of corroborating evidences, not just the eyewitnesses, that would help you to believe that it wasn't him. Here we are just focusing on what did they see? Who did they see? Who was it? And but there is more to the story of concluding whether they're correct or not. They're in error or they're positively identifying.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly. Exactly. And I had overlooked this sentence from the Warner Report itself. Warner Report page 165, it says, quote, if Oswald left his rooming house shortly after 1 p.m. and walked at a brisk pace, he would have reached 10th and Patton shortly after 1:15 p.m., end quote. Well, that's just great because it says he would have arrived after 1:15. As we know, Tippit was shot between 1:09 and 1:14. So just by a single sentence by the Warner Report, it's over.
Right,
And
right,
that's
right.
and as a PS, that's not even including the several minutes Oswald was at the bus stop outside his
Well,
house.
yeah, if we go there and get into all of that for a moment, are you not somewhat hesitant to say that because to me, I think there's ample evidence that he was seen farther east down the block, starting from there and heading west. And if you add the time it takes to head east first and then come back west, I mean, that's 4 or 5 more minutes to the
Yeah.
timeline, don't you think?
And what everyone says is, oh, you can easily walk a mile in 12 minutes, bro. But that's not the point. The fact is that Oswald was seen at the bus stop, you know, several minutes after 1:03 p.m., which would be about 1:08, and Tippit was killed at, 1:14 a mile away, according to Dale Myers. So Oswald couldn't have walked a mile in 6 minutes. He can't do that, and people just change the point and say, "Well, bro, you can easily walk a mile in 12 minutes, bro." You see how they just changed the point? That's
Oh
not
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
no,
point.
no. I listened to some of that in one of your debates. So
That's not the point, but yeah, that's all, yeah. But
how do
yeah.
you feel about, I know that you're to some extent giving deference to the time of death at around 1:14, but I mean if you use the official time of death indicated on the other, the death certificate at the hospital.
right here. Um, so what the Warner report never tells you is that actually 12 witnesses refused to identify Oswald. Author Joseph McBride is he counted 10 in his book. I'm up to 12. So,
Well, I mean,
so
that's pretty important. I mean, it doesn't, it doesn't completely rule out, but it gives a lot of suspicion, correct? That you
yeah,
had so many
exactly.
witnesses, some of which were physically very close. I mean, at the top of your list, Domingo Benavides, I mean, he was 15 feet away, and yet he's refusing to make a positive identification.
Yeah. So the twelve witnesses who refused to identify Oswald was Donnie Benavides, Bill Smith, Warren Reynolds, L.J. Lewis, Mrs. Clemens, Frank Wright, Margie Higgins, Jim Burt, Robert Brock, Francis Kenneth, Albert Austin, and an anonymous witness.
The only one I think we haven't talked about on our podcast episodes so far is Margie Higgins. I may have mentioned her. I don't recall if I did or not. Can you maybe elaborate on
Yeah,
her?
she was yes, that is written up very beautifully in Barry Ernest's book, The Girl on the Stairs. Way back in 1968, he was knocking on doors and he interviewed Mrs. Higgins, and she said that the man I saw, she heard shots. She looked out the window, and she matter of factly said the man. It's not that it wasn't Oswald. She said no, it was not the man they show on TV, which is absolutely damning. Which gets to my next point is that 5 witnesses said that the killer was not Oswald. This is something that no one talks about, really, and that would be Aquila Clemens, Frank Wright, Margie Higgins, as we just said, Jim Burt, and an anonymous witnesses. These 5 people were quoted as saying the killer was not Oswald. So, I mean, if these 5 witnesses had gone up on the stand, is the man you saw standing at no, it's not the man I saw. Would Oswald have walked? Would he have walked? Not one, not two, not three, not even 4, but 5 witnesses said no, that's not the man I saw.
Yeah, I think this is very strong. I think if you had this number of witnesses that were absolutely suggesting, not even suggesting, asserting that it was not the man that they saw leave after he killed the officer Tippit, I think that would be a huge, huge positive for the defense.
Yeah.
The absent, and I think for anyone who's listening to this, it's not the absence of people who are having trouble identifying, who saw somebody but don't know exactly who they saw. These are 5 people who saw what happened and can positively say it wasn't Oswald. That's not the person who was here. That's a pretty strong piece of evidence. I think it might be, of all the things I've heard, that's the one that resonates with me the most. I mean, there's 5 people here that were relatively close. I mean, Frank Wright was obviously Akila Clemens. You've heard already. Our listeners have already heard her comments, and you just mentioned Margie Higgins and Jimmy Burt and William Arthur Smith were, I would say, effectively right with each other most of the way. Is that correct, or do I have that wrong,
Yes,
Matt? Yeah,
they were
yeah.
together.
And the anonymous witness you're referring to is the one who wrote into Playboy,
Playboy.
I think, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
which we've
Yeah.
already talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, but very interestingly, you mentioned Jimmy Burt. The FBI took time out of their day whenever they went and visited Jimmy Burt. And shockingly, what stands out from his FBI interview, apart from the others, is there's not one mention at all of them ever asking him of them anything about identification. Because if you go to all these witnesses, everyone who's interviewed by the FBI, Secret Service, police, they always ask, there's always a mention of an identification process, whether they show him a photo or this, or did the man, you know what I mean? With Jimmy
Mhm.
Burt, we get nothing of that. We don't, there's no evidence that they asked him, or if they did, they just didn't write it down in the FBI report. So we go to reporter Al Chapman in 1968, the guy who wanted that question asked, and he wrote in an article, he interviewed Burt, and he quotes him in this article as saying, quote, "The man I saw kill Tippit was not Lee Harvey Oswald. I got a good look at him as Smith did, and I'm sure it wasn't Oswald. It just didn't look like him." So, which is why Jimmy Burt is on that list. So my question is, did they omit that from his FBI interview? Because, like I said, there's no identification question or answer or anything in his FBI report. So I wonder, did they leave that out because he told them that, or were they just incompetent and just didn't ask them the question?
I mean, it's almost unbelievable, right? It seems to me like that's investigation 101. I mean, the first question you ask is whether or not you positively identified the assailant at the scene. I
Yeah. So yeah. So
Unbelievable, actually. I mean, there's so many throughout all of this, there's so much. I'm sure there were a lot of different people asking questions of different witnesses, but at the end of the day, from a training standpoint, even, it seems like there was such inconsistency in the way that witnesses were approached. And even if there was nothing nefarious about it, if nothing else, it really does show the variation in training and investigative and interrogation techniques.
yeah. So going back to the Warren Commission paragraph, they said that they only mentioned 12 witnesses. Well, it's actually 30 witnesses. It's not 12 witnesses. So in other words, the government Warren Commission omitted like 18 witnesses. So
Yeah.
these are all 30 witnesses right here, as I put up on the screen for you. Archer, Austin, Benavides, Brewer, Jamie Brewer, not Johnny Brewer, Robert Brock, Mary Brock, Burt, Calloway, Chapman, Clemens, Barbara Davis, Virginia Davis, Griffin, Ginyard, Higgins, Kenneth, Lewis, Markham, McRaven, Patterson, Reynolds, Russell, Scoggins, Searcy, William Arthur Smith, William Lawrence Smith, Tatum, Frank Wright, Mary Wright, and anonymous witness. So we have 30 witnesses who either saw the murder, who saw the murder and saw the man running away. So it's not 12, it's 30.
It's funny for a sleepy little street. And of course, obviously, people saw him once he got onto Jefferson too. But that's a heck of a lot of witnesses.
I
30
know,
witnesses.
I know. And people say, whoa, why did no one see Oswald walking from his rooming house
Right.
to the crime scene? And their stock answer is, well, everyone was inside watching listening to the radio and watching the TV, bro. But then when they get to the uh, Tippit crime scene, they say, oh, the evidence is so slam dunk. There are witnesses outside all over the place. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
Right. Well, obviously, shots alarm people, and I'm sure that if you weren't looking outside, you'd get up and look around. So it is a little bit different than just walking down the street. But at the end of the day,
Actually, all these people are outside except for Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins looked out her window. Oh, Mrs. Higgins and McRaven looked out their windows.
yeah, I think that's an important point. I didn't realize that. If there's that many of these, that's quite a few. In fact, the
Yeah,
vast majority are physically outside their house. That's interesting.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I think the Davis sisters were
They
inside.
were they were looked out their script. They opened the door and looked out the door.
Well,
So
they were on, yeah, but they were on
you
the
know,
couch. They were sleeping and were awoken by it. So I don't think, or were sitting on their thing. I don't think they were just happened to be looking out at that moment.
yeah.
Uh,
So
but that's pretty amazing, actually, though, that so many of them were so close out to the
yeah.
front.
So to really boil it down, this is a chart I made. 5 said it wasn't Oswald. 7 refused to identify Oswald. 4 said it was Oswald. 4 are worthless. 2 are useless. And 3 are suspect. So if you really want to summarize everything I've just been saying, people can just use this blue chart that I made right here. And that's what I
And
said.
that's 25 of the 30 witnesses, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
And what are
yeah.
the other five? Are they? That little summation is 25 witnesses. There must be five others then out of your 30. One of them is obviously the anonymous witness.
Chapman down here, he was an eyewitness, but he was never interviewed. He was never interviewed by the FBI. Cersei right here, who was with Ginyard and Calloway, he was never interviewed by the FBI. So like a few of these were witnesses, but they were never interviewed, like ever tracked down and interviewed. So this is a list of everyone who saw the gunman, either the shooting or the man running away, and a couple of them were never interviewed officially.
Got it. Got it.
Oh, and the other one is McRaven. She was interviewed by the BBC for a radio program, but they never asked her, "Is that the man you saw?" They never asked her that. So, and Jimmy Brewer right here. Jimmy Brewer died in the 1970s. He was with James Archer. He was never asked. So, but they all still, even though they were never asked, they still saw the man in the shooting and the man running away.
Got it.
So those are those other five witnesses. But counting the 25 witnesses who did, that would
Who made some sort of statement to law enforcement
yeah,
agencies.
everyone who was asked can be boiled down to this blue chart I made.
Got it.
And if you want to be picky and say, five witnesses were quoted as saying it was an Oswald, since we don't have the tapes of it, you could add the seven and five and say 12 witnesses refused to identify Oswald.
Got it. Got it. But there are 12 that didn't positively out of that
Yeah.
group. Yeah. So it's about
Which,
half. It's certainly about half. And then of the other half, you say only four of the 12 because the other ones have suspect issues with them.
yeah. So to recap, the five that said it wasn't Oswald was Frank Wright, Burt, Higgins, Clemens, and the anonymous witness. The seven who refused to identify Oswald was Kenneth Austin, Smith, Benavides, Reynolds, Lewis, and Robert Brock. The four that said it was Oswald was Barbara Davis, Virginia Davis, Ginyard, and Calloway. The four that are worthless are William Lawrence Smith, Russell Patterson, and Mary Brock. The two that are useless are Scoggins and Markham, and the three that are kind of suspect are Tatum, Archer, and Griffin because they came forward years later.
That's helpful. That's very helpful.
Yep,
Wow. Wow. There is a lot to absorb here. Anybody who's just listening to this casually, if your head is not spinning right now, can you imagine trying to just keep track of 30 different witnesses and just where they were in this process?
it's tough. It's tough. It took me a couple of years to really grasp it.
I'm sure.
Years. Now I did do a little pie chart for you guys.
Ah,
What is this? These are the Tippit eyewitnesses who were asked to make identifications. As we said, 12 said it could not identify Oswald, and four could. So when you put it into a pie chart, it's 75% of the witnesses.
yeah, and obviously this is eliminating 14 that you've categorized in those two or three categories, useless and worthless,
Yes,
and then
yes,
right, and then the five that you didn't include. Right. Got it.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
16 that had some veracity in the process, 12 of which really basically can't attest that it was Oswald, and
yeah.
four that could.
And one day I was reading Robert Groden's 2013 book, JFK Absolute Proof, and he just outright asserted, quote, none of the witnesses to the crime identified Oswald as the killer of Tippit. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, wait a minute. Well, actually, I was like, is that right? And sure enough, it is. So there were, five witnesses who actually watched the murder happen, who watched it go down, so to speak. Jimmy Burt, he told reporter Al Chapman and researcher Larry Harris that it was not Oswald. William Arthur Smith told the FBI he couldn't identify Oswald. Domingo Benavides testified he couldn't identify Oswald. Bill Smith picked the wrong photo in the photo lineup and could not ID Oswald as the killer when shown a photo by the FBI. And then Helen Markham, she testified that she didn't identify anyone, and in no report from that day does she identify anyone. So I was like, holy
Wow.
cow,
Yeah.
holy cow, that is true. The five witness. Oh, and if you add Mrs. Clemens, it would be a sixth
A
witness.
sixth. Yeah.
So I
Wow.
so I should add her here, but so really the six witnesses who watched it go down, none of them can identify Oswald. I was like, whoa. That surprised even me, but it's one of those things where you have to just catalog everything.
Yeah, and this is the detail underneath the general feeling that, geez, we still don't know whether he was there or not. And that's very telling to have all of the witnesses who were close enough to make an eyewitness identification at the moment the shots were fired,
Who saw the
who
murder happen.
saw the murder happen, are not in a position to positively identify Oswald.
Yes. Pretty striking when you put it that way, yes. Yeah. And for those who are watching the video right here, these are faces to names. These are the witnesses who watched it go down. This is Jimmy Burt on the left right here. And on the second one is Bill Smith at the crime scene, as we showed at the beginning. He's lingering in the crime scene. Donnie Benavides, of course, and then Bill Scoggins, and then Mrs. Markham. So
Yeah, and I want to remind the audience that both the Davis sisters, got to the door after the shots were fired. So they actually didn't see the shots being fired. They
yeah,
obviously were very close right afterward, but they're not included in this list because of that reason.
yeah, exactly. But these are the, and I should add Mrs. Clemens here, but she's actually she's right here. So this
Yeah.
is the other three witnesses. This is who saw the
Jack Tatum is on the bottom, it looks like.
this is
Yeah.
Jack. Yeah, we have Mrs. Clemens, Frank Wright, and Jack Tatum on the bottom. Now the reason I call them the other three is because they saw things that apparently that no one else saw. I think even I used to say, no two witnesses tell the same story. Well, actually, if you look at all the 30 witnesses, they do tell the same story. A man on the sidewalk shot Tippit by his patrol car. The only three who do not match up are these three right here: Mrs. Clemens, again, Frank Wright, and Jack Tatum. And we can talk. I can go into Mrs. Clemens if you want. I'm not sure how you want to how you
Yeah,
want
and I think, you know what? I think we have her pretty adequately covered.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
But to summarize real quickly, Mrs. Clemens, she said that there was another man across the street, and that the gunman waved to this other guy as if for him to say, "Go on, get out of here." No one else saw this. Frank Wright said that the killer hopped in a gray car and drove away. No one else saw this. And then Jack Tatum said that after the initial burst of gunfire, the killer started to leave the crime scene, returned to the crime scene, stepped into the street, stood over Tippit, took careful, deliberate aim, and fired one more shot into Tippit's body. And no one else saw this. Wright didn't see what Clemens saw. Tatum didn't see what Wright saw. And so all the other witnesses align up pretty well, except for these three. So we're not really sure what to do with them.
thank you again for listening today to another episode of JFK, The Enduring Secret interview series. Please join us on a regular basis, and you'll find our podcast at your favorite podcast outlet, as well as our YouTube channel on YouTube. And that's JFK, The Enduring Secret.